Hello, everyone, and good afternoon, and welcome to another episode here on the Writers Hub. I'm your host, Gabriel Garcia, the Wandering Scribe and the Wandering Quill, and joining us today for episode 3 is a returning guest. Now, today's guest, as you may remember, is a published YA fantasy author raised in Southern California, now living in, or has lived in Washington State, currently living in Oregon, a huge fan of medieval times and Renaissance fairs, has a TikTok and Instagram account that showcases her character art from her book, and dresses up as a fictional villain, though unrelated to her stories. That character probably has a backstory of their own. And in this episode, viewers and listeners, we'll be talking about the creation of main characters, what goes into them, how to make them authentic, as well as unique to the story. And joining me today is returning guest and fellow author who I'm so happy to have back on the show, author Kelsea Koops. Kelsea, welcome back to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me. I still live in Washington. I've been here for like 15 years.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
My
I'm gonna
bad.
drive into Oregon later today for Renaissance Fair. But yeah, I love talking about main characters because like my main character isn't very main character. Yet
Nice.
he's kind of the focal point, but he has none of that main character energy at all.
Absolutely. And let's actually talk a little bit about that because it ties into the grand scheme of, what people expect in a main character. So for you, Kelsea, could you elaborate on what you meant by that your main character does not have main character energy?
He doesn't want to be the focal of like the story. So in the book, when there's attention on him, he doesn't like it. He doesn't want to be the hero. He's just out to survive. He just wants to be happy and left alone. And later on, when he starts becoming famous, he has anxiety. He doesn't like the eyes on him. He doesn't when there's the so Amiria, who's the hero of the story. Well, she's a hero, but it's muddied. He doesn't understand why she wants to save people. He's like, I'm not risking my
Mm,
life for other people. But he's the main character because all of the weird events that are happening, he is involved in the world isn't a revolving around him because the world itself is a character and things are going
mm.
on. Even if he's not involved, other things are still happening, which is why I have a book four where there's the main characters are completely separated and they just happen to bump into the other set of cast. And so that's why he has no main character persona because he's just there to survive in this world that happens to be moving about. But so like he's just my focal point of who I am watching in the grand scheme of things.
Very true. That is very, very true. And I think as authors, when we're crafting main characters for our stories, there's a lot of work that goes into who these characters are. Yes, we can think of a name, we can think of a backstory, but the character will take changes or will change over time as we write the story. And ultimately, they may not be the same individual. So I'm very curious. I sort of like to begin this discussion, Kelsea. For you as an author, how do you approach characters who are authentic to the stories that you like to tell, but also making them complex?
So when I write the character, I have they're all unique to what their upbringing is, which makes them feel more real because I'm not designing the world to fit the character. I'm designing the character to fit the world. And so when one character like Sterling, he grows up in a lower class bakery and he's kind of like a annoying punk kid because he's like he goes through a little bit of like trouble growing up and he's got to learn how to not be selfish and stuff versus like Amiria who grows up in a high strung military environment. So the
Mm,
way they are going to move about the world and look at it is going to be completely different. So that's how I write my characters' personalities is how are they born, like where were they born? How did they have grown up? How would that develop them into a person? Because said like they are a product of the world. The world doesn't revolve around them. They just happen to be born into this story, just like how we're born into this world. And
Yes.
the way we are raised is the way we end up kind of. There's a little bit of like your natural personality, but a lot of it is also nurture.
Yes, that is very, very true. Absolutely. And I think ultimately, when crafting main characters, we do want them to be complex. We do want them to be authentic, but also we want them to feel like they belong in the story that we are trying to write them in. Because I don't know if you may have read books from the large collection of books you have right next to you, which
Oh
I
yeah, no,
must
I've
say is
never read.
which I must say is quite the collection. But tying to that, I imagine there have been some characters that you've read where they were interesting, but perhaps it's like, well, they don't really feel like they belong to this story. They just feel like they're just put in to either, play an archetype character. And while that is good, that can also be, a very bad thing because as readers, we want a character that makes sense for that world. We want it to be real and true. And I'm wondering, when you were developing your characters for all of your books, did that sort of come up in the discussion for creating them?
I kind of like can picture some of the characters like that you're kind of referring to, but usually those are the characters where there's the can do no wrong characters because they're the main cast. So like no matter
Yeah.
what book you put them in, they would succeed because they're the main character. Versus like a real authentic character, you put them in a different world, and it's just like when you go out of like I say country and you have to adapt to a new place. That's how a character should be. Is they should almost feel out of place because
Hmm.
that is not their world. Um, my characters had changed personalities over from the when I first started writing the first like the draft because as I created the world and the complexity of not the
Hmm.
characters but the world itself, I I molded the characters to align with that. I forgot the talking point. Where was I going with that?
I think
What
you're
was the
talking
question
about
again?
how the world, it seems to me almost like the world, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you for storytelling with like the world dictates the characters and how they are sort of meant to be, as opposed to how maybe some authors write characters to dictate the world. That kind of
Oh
line what you're
yes.
kind of going with?
Yeah, so like my characters, all of their changes in their personalities, which is often caused by like the traumatic incidents they go through. So the characters change because the world itself is alive and it's moving, and events in the world cause them to change. So like throughout their arcs aren't because of some self-righteous feeling they have or something they want to do. Their arcs are because the world around them is evolving and changing and causing and throwing like hurdles at them, and it's them making through it and having to become stronger, or they're becoming more
Mhm.
afraid, or they don't know how to handle and cope what they've been through. So now them as a person is changing because the world itself is moving and changing around them.
Absolutely, very, very true. And I like stories like that. It almost reminds me of in Lord of the Rings, Return of the King, how Frodo, Samwise, Merry, and Pippin, they all go through changes, and you expect them to try to go back to the people they were before, but it's impossible. They can't be those characters in the past because they themselves are not the same characters. And I think as readers, that's enjoyable to see that growth over time and how the world does affect characters, because it does present a sense of realism. It's realistic that, like in the real world, we're going to be changed by our surroundings. We're not going to be the same characters, more or less, depending. But we are going to grow. And I think as authors, we have to be very mindful of that. And another thing, which I really want to hear your thoughts on, Kelsea, is going back to the creation of main characters, is people have an expectation of how certain main characters are supposed to act. What I mean by that is, let's say you're writing a romance fantasy main character. That genre is read more so than any other genre of books. And people, readers, have an expectation of not how the story is supposed to go, but also how the main character is supposed to act and react to others. And as authors, there's this balancing act where we don't want our characters to be too new that it's going to deter the readers. We also don't want them to be carbon copies of other characters that existed. Yes, they can be archetype characters or inspired by, but never a knockoff, let's say, of Harry Potter or of Game of Thrones or anything like that. So for you, Kelsea, how did you make sure that your characters had that familiarity to the genres that they're being written in, but also showcasing your talent, your skill as the author?
I didn't. I gave them the personality that they almost gave to themselves. So I
Okay.
didn't. So like when I in my head, I was like, oh, she's a knight or he's just this, and then I start writing them, and then this is why I like to write multiple drafts because the characters themselves gave their own kind of personalities. Many of times were like I was actually like surprised by something that happened, and I was like, well, I didn't plan on that, but the character's personality drove it to do that. I didn't do that. I guess I technically did, but I was
Mm,
just in the moment, and then that's what felt right. And so I try to keep like away from this, like you're saying, like the stereotypes. Like I made my uh, hero character Miria the strong female, which is uh, a trope. But then I've also made her more convoluted, where she wants to be feminine. She wants to be loved. Like there's too many of these strong females that are just that's all they are. They're just a strong, independent female. She's a strong, independent female, but she wants a partner. She wants to be
mm,
loved. She wants to be held and protected, even though she's the stronger one. But then she also is full of insecurities, and she questions herself, and she's often weak physically. This is where I said like becomes to the our conversation earlier about the realism,
mm-hmm,
where I based her off of the reality where if she's doing a hand-to-hand combat against a guy with same training and he's bigger, she's not going to really win. So like that's why I made her like more realistic compared to what I've seen in the trope of that genre. And then some characters completely dictated their own personality by I was writing one character, he was supposed to be a bully, and I started writing him and he became sad, and then next thing I know, he's actually most one of the most humble people in the whole book, and he has now like I wrote his background and I wrote his point of view, and he ended up becoming one of the primary characters by the end of the book. He was supposed to just be an annoying bully, but instead he ends up being like my favorite character, and he's complex and he's deep and he's humble. And so like I don't know, I guess I didn't pick their personality. Sometimes like that, they picked their own.
absolutely. And I think it ties into, as authors, as we're writing the stories, how the story goes comes very natural. And it's like, oh, if it's going this direction, then the character is going to be written in this style. But of course, over numerous drafts, the character is going to change numerous times. And almost going to what you said, how you had this one character who was written to be a bully, a one off bully, ultimately ended up becoming one of your favorite characters to write about. And I think that's a very important thing to talk about because as authors, we do have that one character that we love to write and we love to experiment and really sort of see, what's the inner workings of this character? What can I do to them to see them grow? So out of all the characters in your stories, what's probably been the one that you've enjoyed the most in terms of
That's
creating and redefining?
that's my his Quillen is his name. He was supposed to be a bully, but when I started writing him, I made him deeper. Where the first time you see him through Sterling, main character's eyes, which so you don't know him, and you're like, oh yeah, this dude the pompous prick. But when I was writing him in my head, I was starting to see like, oh, he's actually this deep person. And why doesn't he talk very much? Why is he always just very monotone and flat-faced? And it's because then I wrote his point of view of the book, and you find out that he's been kind of more jaded. He grew up famous. And I started deep going into like he actually has suffers from a lot of depression and stuff like that. So I got peeled back his layers and layers. So then I liked him so much, I brought him to the third book. I liked him so much that I wrote him his whole background and just getting more and more deeper and complex of his story. And then he's like one of the primary characters in like the fifth book. So he went from like this nobody to like my pride and joy. He's who I like to draw the most. He's who I constantly wanted to write the most about. He's not even the main character, but I was like, no, you up front now, boy. Like I love him because he's fun to write because he doesn't talk very much because of I guess I don't want to give up too many spoilers of the trauma that he has lived through
Mm,
and being born into fame. So he's fun to write because it's how do I get you to understand what he's saying with the least amount of words possible. If I can say no words and all it is a narrow of the eyes, it's just a narrow of the eyes. Sometimes he answers one word. Max, it's like three. So it's fun to write because it's like how do you get to know what this person is thinking without him saying anything? Maybe it's just like he looks out the window and then closes the shutters. So he's that's why I find him so fun to write. But then he's inside of his head. It's uh he's got some voices in his head. So when I write his thoughts, it is like super fun because it's messy. There's his voices and what's going on in reality and his thoughts to it. And
mm.
it's just so it's the complete opposite of what's going on the outside. So he's super fun to write.
Nice. And it almost kind of reminds you of like, the discussion of as authors, like, showing, not telling, and almost make a comparison, the character of the Mandalorian and tying it to your character, as you mentioned, for your character doesn't speak fully like having dialogue, but he does have conversations in his head. And it seems to me like his actions are in a way his dialogue, how he reacts and how he interacts with the world gives you an idea of his personality, how he approaches the world. And I think that's a really cool way to, create a main character that, he may not be a character that talks a lot or talks much, but it's how he interacts with the world. They can get an idea
Mhm.
of who this character is. And adding on to that, there are also characters that we have authors struggle with to write. Either it's like the main villain or side villains, or even just another main character that just makes us so infuriating. I'll give an example. One of the characters that I was writing for my upcoming fourth book, he was an add-on character. His name was Rostam Zygar, and he was just a one-off character, just mentioned in the epilogue. But one of my friends said, this character, I like who he is, but I want to know more. So I literally had to go back. It's like, okay, what's the backstory of this character? How do I make him unique? And I had to rewrite a majority of the story, how he's related to another main character in the story, their brother-in-laws, and just creating everything. It was a struggle. It was a struggle. He did end up becoming a fun character to write, but it is very challenging to write those characters, especially if you may not know how to best approach them. So for you, Kelsea, throughout, again, with your stories, was there a character or a group of characters that you had a challenge writing in terms of showcasing their personality or how they fit in the overall story, or just if they should be considered a main character or a side character?
No.
Oh,
I can't
okay.
think of any characters that I like struggled with. There's scenes that I struggle with, which I struggle more with like happy romantic scenes versus
Mm.
dark, creepy scenes or like off-putting scenes or the fight scenes. God, I love action scenes. So there's scenes that but I can't think of a character, even like the minor characters that are just there for one single scene. And they said the other, instead of Quillen being a bully, there's other bullies, and they're there for like a chapter. But even then, I don't have trouble writing them because I just picture in my head like what's something I think would be a total asshole thing to say or
Mm.
do. And same with like when I write my villains. So my villains aren't the like I'm gonna take over the world and evil, ha ha ha. They're people that could be they're real. Like
Right.
it's just the king doing his king things, but he has this element of creepiness to him. So when I'm writing him, it's what would me as a female think is creepy? What would give me the shivers? And that's what I make him do and what I make him say. He's not doing anything necessarily wrong. It just gives you that oh. Same with like Calyx is the primary villain. Again, he can just be anybody because he comes off this nice he still kind of comes off arrogant, but he can be like any guy at the mall. It is not until you get to know him and see him into a deeper level do you realize just how awful of a human he is. Which and then he said he always stays within the limits of like reality. He has his focus and he's bad. So when I write him, I don't have any trouble with this. It's just what would scare me, and it's he does this thing where he takes the note from Amelia, and it's just the way he looks at her and asks her who wrote this, and it's that tone of like, oh shit.
Mm.
That would scare me if a guy over a head taller than me is pissed at a letter, but he isn't so he's mad. He's just asking who wrote this, and you're like, oh, just little things like that. So I guess I don't really have any trouble writing people because it's well, what I hate to hear, what am I afraid to hear, what would make my heart flutter and stuff like that.
Mm.
So that's I just keep putting myself into the character's situation, and I have no trouble writing whoever it may be.
Nice. Okay. And I think we're touching on something which I think is really, really cool. Maybe we can dive a little bit deep into this for a moment, and that is the realism, almost like fantasy, realism in fantasy, and also, the creation of main characters. Because I think now, going a little bit slightly into the business side, when you look at the business side of being an author, there are the market trends, what's popular with main characters, MCs, and stuff like that. And that usually falls under tropes or archetype characters. And while those are good, I have noticed that archetype characters or trope characters, depending on the author, don't have a lot of personality written to them. And to what you're saying, Kelsey, you like to add a bit of realism to your characters, where, yes, this is a fantasy world, but the personality of these characters, who they are, you can absolutely see them in real life, interactions with them. So, in your opinion, this is a two-parter. Do you think that tropes and archetype characters hurts in the creation of characters for stories? And secondly, how do you balance as an author realism in a fantasy genre when writing characters?
So you can always have tropes, but then you just got to add said they got to be more than just a trope. Like
Yeah.
Amiria isn't just a strong female. She's scared and feminine and she wants to be loved and she makes a lot of mistakes. So it makes her real. She's more than just a female knight. She's a girl. She's a Miria. She's not just the knight. So there's you got to have because people are complex and they have more than one personality. Same with like I have said like in book 4 it follows a different set of characters who have been in the kind of the background to explain why things happen in the world. There's the trope of they were roommates, that, they fell in
Hmm.
love, but they're more than just a couple. They themselves have
Right.
different personalities, and you're watching how the world of being they're forced to be guards, so they're forced to help hang people, and how it's eating them away outside, and they hate themselves because of it, because they're not these bad people. So they're more than just the roommates that fell in love. They're people. So then you got to add more of like their individual personalities to it. Something simple as like William, he's got issue with sounds. So there's like a storm going on and he's freaking out because of the sound. So then Robert helps him. Or you can hear my cat coming in. Um, yes, I want to say hi to the camera. This is Heidi.
I
um,
love it.
or same, it's like William has to do something that makes him feel ill. He has to give some bad news. And so then Robert explains to him how he had a similar moment, and they have this bonding type of thing about something traumatic has happened to them. So they're more than just that. So you could take the trope, but then always just add to it, make them an individual at the same time.
Yes, very true. Very, very true. Katie, it wouldn't be an episode on the show if there wasn't an animal popping in now and then.
You gotta
Love
love
it.
them.
Nice. And I think another thing, which when it comes to creating characters, what's always true is that as authors, we're always going to be inspired by, I talk about the world around us, but also stories, TV shows, and film. I know that for a lot of my characters, they're inspired by, figures like the characters Maximus from Gladiator or some characters from video games. And there's nothing wrong with that. We're always going to be inspired by that, but it's from that inspiration that we can make something of our own. So for your characters, Kelsea, what were sort of the inspirations for these characters?
um, I think, well, I know the dragon, not personality wise, but just look wise, was based off of Saphira. So I guess like I got the boy and the dragon idea from Aragon,
Mm-hmm.
but their personalities are completely different. And
Right.
so I just took more of the appearance of them and the fact
Mm.
that they can talk telepathically, except yeah, nobody else can hear the dragon. It's just if you can only hear your dragon talk to you. So that was the rest of the characters were all like just felt right in the moment. I'm trying to think of like who there's no one like based off. I think that's the only one that's like actually based off of a character. Everybody else was just felt right for the story. This felt like needed. Uh, Sometimes it's like music, like I'm just listening to some music, and then I think of like that kind of helped bring something in. Or there was actually so Robert and William, who have their own book,
Mm.
were other characters that were supposed to be just goons. They were in the third book, and they were just supposed to be guards that help do the bad thing that happens to Amelia. And then my friend, I was reading the draft to my friend, and she's like, "Oh yeah, I shipped them." And then I was like, "Okay, well now they have names, and they're not going to be goons anymore. They're going to actually be more kind-hearted people that are put into this bad situation." So I gave them a couple more scenes for her, and then she loved them, and now they got their own book. So sometimes they get developed like that. Just your friend going like, "Oh yeah, I like that guard in the background." I'm like, well, now he's a primary character.
Nice. That's amazing. And she touched on something which actually goes
Oh,
into
here's
another
a second
discussion.
cat.
Nice. Love it. And that is, what's in a name. And I've always found this very interesting. It comes to creating main characters is that some authors will
You
start
just
with a
hear him
name.
purring.
Nice. Some authors will start with a name and create the character from that, while people do the opposite. They start with the background of this character. This character's a knight. He's gone through some trauma, and then they decide the name. In your opinion, what do you think is easier in terms of creating the blueprint for the character, starting with the name and building upon the name, or building the character and giving the character a name?
Oh, I suck at naming. So I always put the character, and a lot of times I'll say filler. That's how Robert and William got their name. I wrote Bob and Bill. It was just Bob and Bill for a longest time. And my friend was like, "Well, why don't you just name them Robert and William?" And so like I name the characters will often I'll have the personality. They're already been written, and it's just a filler name for now. And then sometimes I'll Google medieval names, and then I'm looking at the name meanings and what name meaning kind of matches the already character. So that's kind of how I'll do
Same.
it. Or said like Sterling, it's because my friend just gave me a bunch of names, and I was like, oh yeah, that one feels like I like that name. So sometimes it's just kind of at random because you like it or not, you know.
Very true. Very, very true. I've used Fantasy Name Generator for some of my characters because just like you, I suck at names. I am not very good at creating names unless they're names of already existing figures for like my fantasy book. Michael, I mean, we have Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, Uriel. Those names already exist. I just build personalities around those. Where in other cases, for my other stories, it's not easy. And sometimes I go from like the personality, the journey, the backstory, and then I get a name. But it ultimately varies between the author. It ultimately what you find to be very, very helpful. And speaking of that, on a little more on again the business side, like the resources. What resources would you say have helped you in, creating or at least finding the names for your characters that you would like to share?
Just the names. I'll just Google medieval boy names, and then I'll just spend for a long time just scanning the names until one just hits and it just feels right. And then same with like I named a character. Her filler name was Eve. She ended up staying as Eve, but then Quillen is the only one who refers to her by her full name. And so I ended up having to just scroll all the names that have Eve in it, and she ended up being called Evelina. And
Ooh,
so
I like that.
yeah, so that makes it's like it goes into more of the character personality. Only one person, Quillen, who's the kind of soft, humble one. He's the only one that refers to her as by her full name, kind of, adding more to what his personality would be. He's a lot more formal.
Very true. Very, very true. And I think I've already answered this, but maybe we can go a little bit more in depth or we can talk about this. Just like characters would go through, different iterations, how they're going to be written in the story from personality, backstory, and everything. Names sometimes do change. We'll sometimes start off with one name, sometimes we'll go with another, go back and forth until we decide upon a name. Throughout your books, were there ever any characters or a character that went through a series of name changes?
Uh, yeah, the main character was. So I wrote this. The, anyways, I put it up on my website if anybody wants to see. I wrote it as a short story-ish back when I was like 21. It is terrible. It is. I was looking at it and absolutely like embarrassingly bad, but it's so funny that I posted it on my website. If anybody wants to see and compare, like just what a decade of practice and writing can be. But the character used to be named like Avon, and the girl was like Kayla or something like that. Just like these, me as a 21-year-old thinking these names are cute type of things versus like Sterling and Amelia placed them more into the time period. And so their names have changed. A lot of characters have changed looks. Like uh, Eve, she had changed from being a blonde girl to having like this nice warm brown skin and this mess of beautiful ringlet curls. So some characters have changed the way they look completely.
Mm,
As you write them, you're just like, no, this is who they are, and you change the way they look. You change their names and stuff. I don't think, nah, I think those are the ones that have like the major name changes that I can remember. I think Ignis was always Ignis. I think Quillen was always a Quillen. I remember. I'd have to like look at that that original story.
Absolutely. But, I always like how you mentioned how, a short story was also the sometimes starting point for the characters. For one of my stories, which I'm working on, it started off as a short story and the names were vastly different. And I hated the original names, could not stand them. And I
Yeah.
went through a name change, still kept the personalities of the characters, but made them a little bit more grounded. And the names I decided upon was Samuel Little, who's a Montanan rancher's son, and Dante Carvillo, who is a Tejano mixed race kid living in Arizona. And the names just stuck. They just fit like,
Hmm.
okay, yes, those are perfect. And then from there, it just snowballed into their backstories, who they are. And then, ooh, this is another one which I've also found very interesting with main characters is nicknames. Sometimes authors will write a nickname for their main characters, and sometimes the readers will stick with that. Was there any nicknames that you gave your main characters that really stuck with and that your readers have also commented on? And how fun is it as an author to assign a nickname to an MC?
Well, so I don't have too many readers, so nobody's made nicknames. But there is a major nickname that I have that's canon. So Amiria will refer to Sterling as Baker Boy because he grew up in a bakery. And so that becomes like his obviously his nickname. So when they're separated, he'll mention how he wants the day where he hears somebody call him Baker Boy again because obviously nobody else will call him that, and it's just kind of meaning that he misses her and stuff. And it ends up being like in the very end, because I'm gonna ruin it, tragedy. I wrote a tragedy. So at the very end of the book, just hearing the words Baker Boy should get a lot of emotion out of the reader because of what it had signified so early on in the story and then why it is being used now.
Mm-hmm. Very true. And also, I just like the term baker boy. I could definitely see that almost like it goes all the way as a term of endearment, but also could be seen in the story as like a negative nickname. It's like, hey, baker
Yeah,
boy, get over here. I can
yeah, because he
absolutely
uses
see
it.
that.
She's making fun of him at first because when they meet, she's supposed to be arresting him because it's illegal to ride a dragon. And that's her job is to
Ah,
apprehend people. So she uses Baker Boy as an insult, but then it ends up becoming a name of endearment.
nice. Absolutely love it. Absolutely love it. Well, we're almost near the end of this incredible discussion, Kelsey. So I'm going to now tie it into this final little piece of discussion, which is as an author, through your books, through how you approach main characters and how you write main characters, what would you say for the authors and writers listening to this discussion? What would you say should be a starting point for new authors when approaching their main characters?
I'm trying to think because it's been so long since I started that series. There, except like I'm 33 and I wrote the idea of it when I was 21. Starting when I was 25 is when I actually started it as a book. And so I'm trying to remember, like, I guess, oh my God, my cat is like scratching something underneath this couch. Uh, I guess you just have a very simple idea of who they are. So like I do my best writing when I'm driving. I put some music on that has like a playlist for each character. And it kind of matches obviously like their personalities and stuff. So I put music on that remind me of the character and I kind of just let my mind wander. And so that's how I make up a lot of my scenes, just kind of just letting in my head, I kind of know this is the character's personality, and then I let the music kind of take them in the direction of what the song is talking about. So then I will kind of help picture that better. I don't know. I'm trying to remember, like, because I said it's been so long since I've created the main characters, but I do know like a lot of lines that I've put in is because I listened to the song and then the song like an example, the song was talking about like who will save me, and so then I end up like, well, that's genius. So then I have Amiria having this conflict in her mind of when she's out and alone about like, am I am I truly free and stuff like that. Oh, that's what the words was song was going off about, am I free? And then so I have her kind of thinking about that. So I don't know. I can't remember what it was like to originally make the characters. I can only remember now, 8 years later, what it's like to continue writing them. So I don't know.
Very true. And I think to add my 2 cents to this is when writing main characters, use what works best for you, whether that's, through music, through types of characters you enjoy reading or watching. And I will definitely say, understand the genre that you're writing in. As I've mentioned before on this and my other interviews and other episodes, there is an expectation from the reader when it comes to the story as well as the characters. Some authors will write to the readers in terms of characters, but ultimately, write the story that you want to write and write the characters you want to write. Make them feel realistic, make them feel authentic and compelling. Find that balancing act where you're showcasing who you are as the author, but you're also writing a character that also feels very, not just believable, but reminiscent of a type of character that a lot of people have enjoyed in other media. And just experiment with names, experiment with characters, and who knows, sometimes a side character may become a main character in their own story. And even the villains are, I will say, probably the funnest to write because no villain ever considered themselves a villain in their own
Oh,
stories. They always view themselves as the hero. Unless you're explicitly writing a character which is meant to be the most hated person, then absolutely go have fun with it. But again, find that balancing act. If you're writing a villain, write a villain that you love to hate or you just absolutely hate, but don't make him to where he deters the whole story and that just pushes the reader off. You want a villain that's going to impact the story and be very engaging. Ultimately, it boils down to experimentation, trial and error, and writing the story that you want to write and just finding your voice. And on that note, viewers and listeners, we conclude this incredible episode 3 here on the Writers Hub. I want to give a huge thank you to my friend Kelsey Koops for coming back on the show. It's always a blast having her. Now, Kelsey, where can people find you on social media if they want to reach out and talk with you? And where can people buy copies of your books?
so I have Instagram. You could type in Kelsey Coops underscore author. Same with TikTok. Again, Kelsey Coops underscore author, or you type in Lumi as the name that should be on there. As the name I go by, as that's my TikTok character personality. Um, you can find links to books on my website, kelseykoops.com, or you also can find like I have multiple videos and I have my drawings or like shorts that I have put on there. There's also the ebooks are free on there. I just put the PDF on there just so people can just have access to it because Ingram Spark won't let me put the books out for free.
Oh,
So
yes.
if people want to read them for free, they're on my website. Um, Same with like you can order the book because I go through Ingram Spark. Any bookstore can order my books. Any online website can order my books. Just type in Kelsey Coops and then into the search.
Nice. I will link all that down below in the description of this video. And also, my viewers and listeners, if you haven't read a chance, if you haven't had a chance to read Kelsey Coops' novels, I highly encourage them. I am still in the process of finishing up my reads. I started reading them, but other books came up and life happened. So I will be posting a full review on my channel as well as on my website. And I don't want to spoil anything, but it is such an incredible book. I'm not going to spoil which book I'm reading because, again, I want you, viewers and listeners and readers, to experience it for yourself. But what I'll say is Kelsea is an incredible author. She is super talented, and everything we talked about in this video, I see it in her story. I absolutely enjoy how she writes her characters, how she approaches storytelling, and I am mad that I didn't get a chance to read this in the beginning when I first heard about it, but I'm reading it now. So be on the lookout for my official review of one of Kelsea Coop's stories. Again, don't want to spoil it, don't want to spoil the name, but you'll be seeing it on my website very soon, as well as the others coming soon. And as always, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to stay up to date with all my new episodes coming out. And if you want to learn more about Kelsea and her books, I will attach her first debut on the channel right over here. Well, everyone, thank you for joining us for episode 3 here on the Writers Hub. And again, a huge thank you to Kelsea for coming on the show. We wish her the very best. Go show her some love and support from one author to another. And until next time, this has been the Wandering Scribe and the Wandering Quill signing out. Wishing you all a wonderful day wherever you are in the world. And we'll see you all in the next episode.